For years, we fawned over the masterful storytelling that was the Avatar series, but it was only recently that we got access to the long-lost unaired pilot, and boy, was it different. Whenever a cartoon is being pitched to a network like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, Adult Swim, etc., a pilot episode is created to show executives why their show is worth being commissioned. It happened with Gravity Falls, SpongeBob, Steven Universe, Teen Titans, all the best shows had them, but a lot of the time, they weren't exactly what would eventually become the show that we all know and love. And it turns out, that's exactly what happened with Avatar: The Last Airbender. The pilot was available long ago on the Season 1 DVD release, but Nickelodeon released on their Twitch livestream the full pilot episode, showing the genesis of what would eventually become one of Netflix's top shows. So let's dive into The Last Airbender pilot and how exactly it was different. The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra weren't children's cartoons that was just there to be happy fun times. It had some really dark stuff in it, but always kept it above a certain level. Yeah, it dealt with loss, identity, and hinted at the death of certain characters, but we never saw anyone or anything actually dead on screen. So what if I told you that the original Avatar pilot did? Like, damn guys, you just thrown those children's TV regulations out the window, huh? During the pilot, we jumped straight into the action with Aang and the gang on the run from Zuko in his ship. Fireballs flying past Appa left and right. It's only when a giant sea serpent called an unagi suddenly appears and distracts Zuko for long enough for them to get away. Well, while we later see Sokka get kidnapped by Zuko, you may notice something that enters the gate of his little fortress: the unagi's severed head being wheeled in. They knew they were pitching to Nickelodeon, right? Well, then again, SpongeBob can get pretty dark sometimes. When it comes to entertainment for younger audiences, it's typical that you stray away from any kind of references to death, especially in this gruesome fashion. On top of the characters being a lot more serious, this pilot definitely hadn't mastered the balance of levity that it did in the later series. The original Team Avatar is all here in the pilot. It's good to see everyone as they were developing. We've got Momo, Appa, Sokka, Aang, Kaya. Wait, Kaya? Yep, that's right. Katara was originally named Kaya in the pilot. When a pilot is created, you typically have room for improvement and changes after you get commissioned and before you deliver the final product. Well, with all the characters involved in Team Avatar, things were pretty different back then. Aang was a little more laid back and independent, almost resembling some traits that would later become Toph's. Also, he was voiced by Mitchel Musso from Hannah Montana fame instead of the eventual Zack Tyler Eisen. Sokka is a lot more arrogant, calling both Kaya and Aang names, and not in the way we could just brush off as endearing. And Katara, or Kaya as she was back then, well, she's a lot less hot-headed and independent than she is in the actual Last Airbender series, seemingly more reliant on the likes of Aang and Sokka. But the biggest change in the group is probably Katara and Sokka's relationship with Aang. It's pitched during the pilot that Katara and Sokka have elected themselves to protect Aang instead of having their own motivations for going with Aang, like finding their father or learning waterbending. And they also keep calling Aang a kid, stripping him of responsibility and treating him like he is much younger than they are. Ultimately, I think we can all say we're glad that this dynamic was refined into what we got in the final series. Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, there was a kick-ass opening to an animated series that left the world itching to see what was beyond the first few minutes. The silhouettes we see bending each of the elements, moving into a brief but easy to understand summary of events that allow anyone to jump into the series is something so awesome, I want to stop recording and go watch it now. But the pilot still had some developing to do. The opening of The Last Airbender pilot was a little longer than its refined counterpart. The opening features fully lit characters with backgrounds of each of the nations each bender is from when showing off their element. It then goes into some sort of storybook format recounting important events, like how the Avatar vanished and then Aang was found in an iceberg. It lacks some flow, but you can understand why they maybe wanted to include more information to give people a better idea of the world they were entering, since there wasn't really a fish out of water character to act as the audience's unknowing point of view. One of the biggest things you'll notice when you boot up the pilot is its sudden rush into the plot. Once the title sequence is over, you jump right into the action with the Fire Nation pursuing Aang and the gang. We barely get any development of the characters like we did in the actual first episode, and we sort of learn about the characters' personalities along the way. The plot rushes into Sokka being captured so that we can get an epic battle scene. We get small moments between each of the characters, but they definitely feel more like caricatures of undeveloped versions of our favorite team. It's fairly obvious the pilot episode plot was supposed to be a summary of what they were trying to accomplish, rather than a sneak peek into a plot for a single episode they were working on. While it still had that episodic flavor to it, there's not really anything that the characters have to deal with apart from your run-of-the-mill "Zuko is chasing us" plot. Speaking of Zuko, there is one character missing I think we all notice. Leaves of the vine, falling so slow. Uncle Iroh, you were the treasure we were yet to know. And apparently, the creators of Avatar were yet to either. The most glaring absence in this pilot is everyone's favorite uncle, and he is very much missed, as Zuko's character is very different without him. There doesn't even really seem to be hints of Uncle Iroh anywhere in the pilot, so maybe he was developed late on in order to make sure that the opposing sides of the conflict had a bit of depth instead of just being really evil bad guys. Throughout the series, Uncle Iroh acted as the grounding force for a lot of characters, not just Zuko, but especially him. And without him, in this pilot, Zuko almost resembles a hybrid of him and Azula. Without anyone to check him, he's just a power-obsessed villain making all of his soldiers miserable and scaring them into doing what they're told. When battling Team Avatar, he promises if they turn themselves in, he'll make sure his father goes easy on them. For anyone that knows the plot of Avatar, you know that Zuko doesn't have that kind of relationship with Ozai. And the other interesting thing is that Zuko never mentions being in exile. Even though the groundwork of Zuko was already there, the scar on his face and his voice provided by Dante Basco, both he and Uncle Iroh were yet to have their day in the spotlight. Animal companions, if done right, can always add a cool dynamic to a group of characters. Appa is the stable rock that keeps them moving, always reliable. And Momo is like the cute little mascot of the group. And while Momo doesn't seem too different in the pilot as to what he ended up becoming, hungry, a little scrappy, and always by Aang's side, it turned out he may have had an arch nemesis, much like Zuko was to Aang. Inside the fortress, after Zuko takes Sokka captive, we see a messenger hawk carrying a message by his side. Whenever Aang attempts to save his friends, Momo gets into the fray and starts to battle with this hawk. This implies that this hawk was more than just a passing creature, but Zuko's pet. While it would have been interesting to see Zuko have a pet, I think having 3 animal companions throughout the main characters would have been a crowd. The Avatar world is very heavily based off of Asian culture. You can see this in the designs of the buildings, traditions, and even the clothing. And it seemed like the creators didn't have everything figured out yet. One example is during the title sequence, we see various buildings in the backgrounds of the benders demonstrating their element. During the Water Tribe segment, the buildings seem to be castles rather than the igloo-inspired structures we see in the final series. The most glaring difference is the Fire Nation outfits. They were oozing with flares and pointy edges, which made them a little bit cheesy. These outfits, along with the designs for the ships and structures, were changed on the final release, and I think we can all agree that the Fire Nation looks a lot more threatening for it. As we can all sort of tell, the motion behind the bending of elements in the world of Avatar is derived from different forms of martial arts. There's different flows to each of the bending types, and as a result, each element is distinct in its own right. But before all of this was nailed down, there were some concepts behind bending that were cut out of or adapted into the main show. One such example of these unique ways of bending is when Zuko is chasing Team Avatar. He and the rest of his crew work together to create a giant fireball which explodes in the sky, creating several different fireballs to rain down on their target. The firebenders all blast fire into the center between them, which then creates a ball, and with one powerful synchronized knee upward, it soars into the air. There are other examples of the laws of bending not being entirely defined, including that of Aang's airbending. His glider is apparently able to carry 3 people before he hits the main series, and he was able to wall run without barely any startup. But then again, these are building blocks, people. Building blocks. One of the biggest changes we see is Aang's ability to summon the Avatar state at will. The Avatar state, in the case of both the pilot and the series, is a defense mechanism that allows him to multiply his power. And while we do see him using this state in a dangerous scenario, he's the one who puts himself in that position in order to summon the Avatar state at will, which does seem a little overpowered, tricking yourself into God mode. In later commentary, the creator said that the concept behind this ability needed to be more complex. So they devised that initially, Aang had no control over it, hence had to be in genuine danger in order to summon it. So we went over a lot of things that have happened in the pilot, but I thought it would be interesting to take note of a couple of things that were later reincorporated into the series. Okay, here we go. The serpent that attacked the characters in the pilot was recycled in The Serpent's Pass and The Awakening. The Fire Nation soldier armor design was scaled down and later reincorporated as outdated disguises during the Siege of the North Pole in Book 1. Zuko and Aang's scaffolding battle was later reused in Return to Omashu in Aang's battle with Azula. The concept of the flying chase sequence between Momo and a bird was later used with the pirate captain's iguana parrot during the waterbending scroll, and later between Momo and Hawkeye in The Runaway. Aang saving Zuko last minute with his glider was reused in The Blue Spirit. Though Kaya was renamed as Katara, the name was later reused as her and Sokka's mother's name, and later Katara and Aang's daughter. When Aang airbends in the opening, a statue of a lion turtle can be seen. And during the opening sequence, the waterbender resembles Pakku, the waterbending master of the North Pole, and the earthbender has several design elements reused in Toph, the Boulder, Sud, and Bolin. And there you have it. You may not like it as much as the final product, but it was a first draft, people. It had to go through this development stage to get to what it would eventually become. What do you guys think? Were there any parts that you thought should have been kept in? A darker world might have been interesting. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time.